Welcome to the Get Published podcast, sponsored by Brodie Consulting Group. To get more information about our coaching, publishing, executive ghostwriting, and podcast production services, go to getpublishedpodcast.com. Hello, I am Paul Brodie, and thank you for joining us for another episode of the Get Published podcast, where we help authors get published with a proven system that works. Today, we're being joined by Paula Rizzo, author of Listful Thinking, using lists to be more productive, highly successful, and less stressed. Paula, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to chit-chat a little bit.
Well, we're looking forward to it. As I was mentioning before the show, I'm the biggest list nerd around, so I've really been looking forward to talking with you about this.
Nice.
Well, let's go ahead and get started. So for our first question, what is the one piece of advice that you would give to a first-time author who is currently writing their book?
Well, I would say to chunk out what you're going to do as far as how you're going to write this book. Because so often with lists and bucket lists, people will put on their list, write book. It is too big a task for you to write a whole book in a day, right? So instead, really think about all of the things that have to go into writing that book, creating the proposal or creating, the table of contents, and then using each one of those things as a task to be able to be more productive. Because a lot of times people think, oh, I'm not getting very far. I don't know how long this is going to take me. But if you set up a roadmap and then put those dates, those little, tasks on your calendar, it'll be a lot easier to achieve it that way.
Yeah, just to tack a couple little things every single day versus worrying about that huge big picture that's going to be months out.
It's too much. It's too overwhelming. And then that's why people end up not doing it, because they think, oh, well, I don't have enough time. But you do have enough time for the small pieces that then add up to an entire book.
Exactly. Focus on 3 things a day, get them knocked out. Next day, focus on 3 more things. Yeah,
I like it. You are a master list maker over there. I like it.
As I said, I was looking forward to this show because I'm a big believer in lists. And the thing is, it's just going after those little things every day because you're right. It adds up over time. It's a process and you have to get used to it and you have to be consistent.
Yeah, I mean, I think of it because, I'm a television producer for years and years and years. And so we would be putting together a show and it would be snippets of stories. You would do one story at a time, very, very short stories would lead up to one big show. And so doing the book in the same way is really helpful.
Well, what do you feel is the hardest part about getting published?
Well, understanding if people are actually interested in your topic. I think for me, I thought I was just a crazy list maker, and doesn't everybody do that? Not everyone does it. So I got some really great advice from a friend of mine who was an author early on, and she said, start a blog first. See if you're even interested in this topic. Can you write 50 blog posts on it? Are people interested in it? Are you fired up about it after 50? And I said, you know what? Let me try that. And I did it. And of course, here I am 7-8 years later since I started a blog and it became a book. And now my second book, Listful Living, is coming out. So understanding the market, knowing are there people out there who would be interested in reading your book? It's very, very important before you even jump in.
Well, the nice thing with that, too, when you come up with those 50 different items, you can essentially take that, repurpose it, and there's most of your book.
Oh, it was so, I put my first book together in just a couple of months because I had already been talking about a lot of this stuff. I just needed to flesh it out, do a couple more interviews, things like that, but the bones were there.
Well, let's talk about marketing. So please share a marketing strategy that you have used in your book launch that has worked well.
Well, I used traditional media. I tried to get as much media for my book as possible. As I mentioned, as a TV producer, I know that media works, to give you a little bit of a boost. And oftentimes, experts or authors will come to me as a media strategist and they'll say, I'll do some media when my book comes out. It's too late. You really need to do media way before the book comes out so that the media, the producers, the editors, they know who you are as an expert already. And so when you have a book, they're like, oh yeah, we love her. Let's bring her back on. Oh, now she's got a book. Sure, let's bring her in. So you want to be that friendly face that they know that they don't have to test out when the book comes out. So I would say, to really start doing your marketing as a subject matter expert way before the book even comes out, way before you even think about the published date, but really get yourself out there. And it's a good way to also try out what you know and see what resonates, see what kind of ideas they gravitate towards. Oh, you should put that in the book.
So how can someone become a subject matter expert if they don't already have their book out?
Well, I became an expert in list making, and I was so you can truly become an expert in anything. And so what I did was I really just started doing those 50 blog posts. I wrote blog post after blog post. I started interviewing people. I was just curious. I wanted to see, how is what I'm doing different than other people, or how is it similar, or how can I help people? And so I looked at it from a curious eye, the eye of a journalist, to say, how can I be of service? How can I help other people who this may not come so easily to? And as I did that, I became the expert. I started to pitch myself in media as, someone who could tell you how to get your to-do list done and how to make sure that you were super productive. And, once you have your name out there as that go-to expert, it then is much easier to have a following and to have people then buy the book, because that's the end game, is that you do want to sell books.
So with that, you mentioned you had the blog. So if someone, though, was coming out, first-time author, they don't have a blog, they don't have anything, they just have that story in their head, how would they be able to pitch themselves to be that expert? Because I love your concept. I'm just trying to figure out how we can frame this for people that are listening right now that are interested in doing this, but may not necessarily have a blog or have a podcast or even have that book out there.
Sure. So to look at the outlets that you want to be featured in and really pay attention to what do they cover, and create a pitch that is specifically designed for that audience. And the way that you know what the audience wants is by watching the show and see what other things have they done. And then a secret is to make sure you watch the commercials or listen to the commercials or read them in a magazine, because the advertisers have spent a lot of money to target exactly who's listening or reading or watching. And so to jump on that and say, okay, well, looking at the advertisements, I guess it's probably a male audience, or it's a female audience, or it's an older demographic or a younger demographic. And then taking what you know and being able to be of service to that audience so that you have something that they can take away that they will, change their lives tomorrow. Because producers and editors in newsrooms, that's all they're thinking about is their audience. Would our audience care about this? Would they get something out of it? So if you, as the expert, do that work for the journalist, you're much more likely to get booked.
And typically when you send a pitch, I'm assuming this is something pretty short and sweet, right? Probably less than a paragraph, talking about the benefits, how it will help the audience.
It should take 30 seconds for a producer to skim and get what you're talking about. So use bullet points, a lot of white space if you have to bold something. If the producer doesn't understand your pitch, it's always a no. It's very rare that they're going to reply back and say, hey, this kind of sounds good, but I'm not sure. And, unless they know you. They get so many emails that it's too difficult for them to have to go and do that. They just blow past and go to the next thing. And so I always say there are 3 things that you have to have in every pitch that really makes it compelling. So the first is the hook. Why now, right? Is it based on a holiday? Are we talking about a trend? Is there something in the news? What really makes it juicy right now? So that's the hook. Then the twist. How is this different than everything else we've heard about this topic? Maybe you're going to tell me that bacon is really good for you. And that would be terrific. So that would be an interesting pitch. And then the takeaway. The takeaway is the third part. And that is really, what does the audience take away? What will they do tomorrow that will change their lives? Because that's what the producer cares about. They want to know, what will their audience get out of this segment?
And I think as long as you can make that clear in under 30 seconds, pretty easy to get on the show, right?
Yeah, and you know what? It's a collaboration. So even if you don't hit it out of the park the first time, I can't tell you how many experts I would go back to if I knew them, and say, hey, this is kind of interesting, but what else you got? Let's get on the phone. Let's talk a little bit. Let's talk through it. Or we just did something similar, but I like the way you think. So it's a collaboration. The thing you want is really a response. That gets the ball rolling. And, sometimes if it doesn't work then, at least you know that you're on the radar.
Exactly. If they don't use it the first time, they might use it the second, the third, the fourth. It's just being consistent and constantly reaching out.
Oh, for sure. And, I was notorious for going back in my emails and just using it like Google and thinking, okay, was I pitched a professional organizer? Because now I need one. And so let me just see if somebody had pitched me something and I'll respond back to that person, 3, 4, 5 months later and say, hey, I didn't need it then, but now I need it.
Now, when you did this, you mentioned you were pitching television and also podcasts. Is that correct?
I did, yes. I pitched magazines as well, and also radio.
So how many different outlets would you pitch at one time? Were you like spending the day going, okay, I'm going to reach out to these 10 different stations or these 10 podcasts? What was your strategy?
It's very specific about the way that I did it. It was very, very much looking at my book and saying, how could I spin this for, let's say, brides? So I had a whole pitch about how I could, help brides. I got myself in Brides magazine. And the same thing with health. I did a detox your to-do list. That was in Dr. Oz magazine. So it was very, very specific to the type of person listening or the type of person reading, what would be interesting to them. So I would say don't go overboard. You don't want to do a zillion at once. Really be targeted and say, okay, I really want to target this kind of outlet or this show, and then create something custom for them, because producers understand and they get it. I can't tell you how often I would get a pitch when I was a producer that it was obvious it wasn't meant for me. It was obvious because it was just copy and pasted from something else, or they even left a different producer's name on it, or they talked about a different anchor or something like that. It happens all the time. But to be, very mindful about the way you pitch, it's important.
And that's one of the things I've noticed too, even when I've had guests on the show. I'm like, so how did you get our information? And we're like, hey, we looked it up, we listened to the show. And that was where something got my attention, when someone actually said that they've listened to the show. And you mentioned that prior to our interview, is that you listened to a couple episodes, you checked it out. And it's just such a great way to warm up a host, going, hey, I have checked out your show. I really like this. This is what I find interesting. This is how you're helping. And that really just shows that you've got some skin in the game, and it's going to be much likely, increase the likelihood of having a much warmer lead and the opportunity to potentially be on that person's show.
Oh, for sure. And also then you have a little bit of insights into the host. There might be things you could bring up that would interest them. There was a woman who I was media training. She's a fiction author, and she did some research about this show that she was going to be on, TV show. And she found out that the anchor loved the show Dallas. And so one of the examples she gave used, the characters from Dallas, and that just delighted the host. He just warmed up to her. They had a fun time. He had her back again. So it really, it made her stand out as somebody who did her homework and who actually cared about the segment.
Yeah, it's like, who shot JR? The first thing I thought of when you talked about Dallas.
Yes, that's right.
Well, excellent. Well, I appreciate you sharing that. I really wanted to take a little deeper dive into that, because it really is an art. It's not one of those things where you just blast 50 people with the same pitch. You've got to tailor it, because if you don't, the likelihood of them actually responding are going to be slim and none. And you've really got to make it specific and tailored towards the audience, whether it's a magazine, blog, podcast, local show, TV show. Now, one thing I did want to ask you, do you have any different strategies to get on local television versus maybe getting on local radio or getting on a podcast?
Sure. So for local TV, the way that I always tell people to think about it is, would your segment make a good tease? So could you hear them saying, coming up at 5, XYZ, why list making is better for your health than whatever else? Can you hear them doing that tease? Because if you can, you should definitely pitch something like that, because that is what those producers are looking for in that newsroom. They're looking for stuff to grab people's attention while they're in the middle of doing this through their day, or, depending on what time the newscast is. Maybe if it's a morning show, people are half, getting dressed in the morning, half listening. What will really pique their interest? So I always kind of throw that out there as something of interest. And also, it needs to have some kind of local hook. Why is it relevant to that city or town? Why would they care about it specifically? And, for podcasts, you have more time probably to talk than you would for TV, so to be able to make sure that you can sustain a conversation have, a whole bunch of ideas. And then for radio, I always look at radio as sort of like a cocktail party, because radio hosts or radio producers are different than television producers. And radio producers want to put somebody on who can chit chat for a while, who can talk, and who can sustain the conversation, and they let them go, right? They let them try it out. Television producers never do that. As a TV producer, I would know exactly how long the segment was. This is how long you have for each answer. It's very scripted. It's very, time sensitive. So radio is a really great way to get started, because you do have the luxury of time. Same thing with podcasts. And then, you work from there to television, because television is very much about being succinct and compact with your answers.
Well, one thing I've noticed with TV, typically the ideal segment's usually between 3 and 5 minutes, versus radio, which could be anywhere from 15 minutes to an hour, similar to a podcast.
Sure, exactly. So it is very much, you have to pack a lot into a small package for television, and be thinking visually. If you're going to pitch something to TV, the producer's thinking, what am I going to show? How can I show this? I just did a piece for a website about professional organizers again, and why they make the best guests for TV, because they have built-in before and after photos. When they go in and they clean up somebody's house, or they help somebody, declutter, the before is a mess and the after looks terrific. That's great TV.
Absolutely. Well, speaking of books, I'd like to ask, what is your favorite book, and what was the number one thing that you learned from it?
I think it's sort of an unlikely one, but I love The Immortal Life of Henrietta Lacks, it's a nonfiction book that reads like fiction. And I'm not super into medicine or history or whatever, but this is just, I love it. And it's about Henrietta Lacks, who, was a poor black tobacco farmer whose cells were taken without her knowledge in the 50s. And those cells, ended up making some of the most important, becoming one of the most important tools in medicine. It was used for the polio vaccine and gene mapping and all this other kinds of stuff that is like, I had no idea this was happening. It even turned into an HBO special. But I highly recommend it. It really gets me excited, and I really, really love it.
Yeah, I remember the story about that, and I remember the movie. I think Oprah was actually starring it, if I'm not mistaken.
That's right. Yep, that's the one.
Well, for our final question, what is your favorite quote and why?
My favorite quote is "You become what you believe," which Oprah Winfrey said, actually. And it has stuck with me all throughout my career, everything that I've done in television, as well as then becoming an author. So it's served me well so far.
Excellent. Well, Paula, I want to thank you for being a guest on the show. What is the best way for people to find you online?
Sure. I am all over social media under List Producer, and my website is listproducer.com or paularizzo.com.
Well, Paula, I want to thank you once again for being on the show, and I wish you all the best in your author journey ahead.
Thank you so much.
Thanks again for joining us today. To learn more about how you can be featured in our brand new Get Published business book, go to getpublishedpodcast.com.